Welcome to AI, Government and the Future, a podcast by Corner Alliance. We explore the intersection of artificial intelligence, government and the future. We work with government to create results. We ignite your agency's mission by helping you to design and implement high-impact and innovative federal programs in AI, broadband, cybersecurity, public safety, and more. Being a government ally is at the core of all we do.
Welcome back to AI, Government in the Future. I'm your host, Marc Leh, and today I'm thrilled to have Dr. Eva-Marie Muller-Stuler join us. Dr. Eva-Marie Muller-Stuler is an award-winning data and AI pioneer who has garnered global recognition for her expertise in AI governance and data science methods for over 2 decades. She's a sought-after advisor to governments and international institutions such as the UN, UNESCO, ICGA. Currently, she serves as a partner at Ernst & Young, where she leads the data and AI practice for Middle East and North Africa. Previous lead of AI overseeing the development and implementation of complex data science and AI projects. Before joining EY in January 2022, she was the Chief Technology Officer for AI and Chief Data Science for Middle East and Africa at IBM, and also served as the Director and Chief Data Scientist at KPMG in London, where she led one of the first data science teams in Europe to develop groundbreaking data-driven methodologies, techniques, and AI applications for business decision support. So welcome, Dr. Eva-Marie, and we're happy to have you on the show.
Thank you very much, Marc. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm very excited to hear your perspective on a variety of topics here today. I think where we'll begin is, just kind of getting a little bit of background and current focus of your career. And I guess if you don't mind, describing, what led you to begin your journey in this field and kind of what initially sparked your interest in AI and potential ethical or business support implications of the technology.
Absolutely. So I started basically right at university. I studied mathematics. And at that time, everybody was like, there's nothing you can do with mathematics. You can become a teacher, you can become a professor, or you can become an actor. But really, I assure you, really want to study something so theoretically. So I then decided, okay, to ensure that I might get a job after university, I added business and I added computer science, which at that time was a really odd combination. I think today everyone is looking for someone with that background. After university, I started my career also at EY. Actually, I started there and I came back. And in corporate performance improvement and valuation. At that time, we were looking at financial models and balance sheet, P&L, and so on, and to understand how we can forecast corporate performances and how we can improve it. And what are the points where we can improve certain return on cash flows and so on. And actually that really impacted the way I now see data science and AI for corporates. Because I always say there's a difference between innovation and corporate performance improvement. And a standard data science and AI team should focus on corporate performance improvement. So it really comes to where can we make business decisions, where can we make better, smarter, cheaper decisions, save money, increase revenue, or manage the risk. After doing my PhD in AI, I went to the UK and I became restructuring director of an investment fund. And there we realized the more data and the more information we have, the better our models get and the better we are able to outperform competition and the market because we had better insights. So that led to me joining KPMG in 2013, where we were building the first data science and AI team in Europe across all consulting industry. The industry didn't exist back then. We called us always on machine for better business decisions and complicated names like that. And we decided to use a mathematical and a science approach to forecast what is happening in the market. How can we forecast sales? How can we manage the risk? How can we understand what our customer wants? And at that time, it was the beautiful area before any legislation in that field. We were building massively connected ecosystems. And then we realized we have so much information about the people that we could actually go ahead and just start blackmailing people. It was getting to the point where we were like, why are we even bothering building financial models? And we then realized how much value there is and how much danger there is in this data. We also realized when we started building our models that even though we decided maybe we take certain parameters out because we don't want to be seen as driving business decisions based on religion. But then we also realized if we remove religion or we remove the gender and so on, there are proxies for these drivers. And we realized sometimes our models had massive biases. And based on that and the self-learning algorithms and watching them get worse and worse and actually getting to a point where you kind of like, this is not the AI that I want to build. That's not the society I want to create. That may go into the policy making and the ethical concerns on saying there is something we are building, there's something that is coming up that needs clear legal frameworks where we need to agree on how to build these AI solutions in a responsible way. That's how it all started. I mean, the fascination and the passion is always there because no other field or hardly any other field you can have such an impact on people's life, on businesses and so on. But also, when we say impact, we also have to always be considerate that an impact can be positive and negative. And that's why it's such an important position and it's such an important concern to say these projects have to be ethical and responsible. I like to make the difference between ethical and responsible because ethical for me is doing the right thing and trusted and responsible is doing things right. And both have to apply for our AI solutions.
Yeah, well, I think that's very helpful context. And it sounds like, whether it's in the private sector or more recently working more closely with government entities, the need to define specific problems to solve when developing a model is kind of an important first step. Having the, technical capabilities and skills to develop an algorithm or model that produces results and learns from itself over time is also a critical input. But, building in controls or, parameters that ensure the ethical and responsible nature and operations of these models are becoming more and more important, not only for you, but I would assume more of a priority with some of the organizations that you're working with recently?
Absolutely. We have seen in the past so many AI solutions fail. We have seen so many black box solutions. And if we don't understand why we are making a decision, we can't really trust that decision. We really have to be transparent. We have to understand the data, the potential risk, the potential biases. And that's why these legal frameworks became so important. And I remember a few years ago, there was always a discussion on does stronger legal frameworks actually hinder innovation? But of course, the contrary is the place. The more we can trust this solution, the better it is for a business. So if you can explain why a model is making a decision, if it is transparent, if you understand where the data is coming from, if you can audit them, if they're fair and so on, they don't risk your company's reputation, then it's AI you should use. Otherwise, you put your whole business at risk and you're basically flying a plane blindfolded. That might work for a few meters, but in the long run, I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah. And I want to expand on because I know you've done a lot of work in terms of defining and working on models that support ethical artificial intelligence or ethical AI. And when I hear ethical AI as a term, my mind immediately goes to maybe avoiding biases in model training data or unconscious biases in the types of outputs that a company or a government organization may be using to inform its positioning or the type of services and products that it's offering to its customers or constituents, potentially exploiting private data without the consent of its owner. I guess, do any of those concepts track with your definition of ethical AI? Or in simpler terms, what characterizes an AI tool or system as being ethical?
First of all, I think it's important that it does no harm, and that we have a clear risk understanding. Then there are different frameworks from different governments around the world, but they all come down to very similar cores of saying, it has to be transparent. A user has to know how it is that the data is being used, that it's a machine making the decision. There has to be a clear description of how the algorithm works. It has to be tested for biases and fairness. It has to be explainable. It has to be accountable. They have to be safe to use. For example, nobody would like to sit in a self-driving car that basically reacts on every time somebody pampered with a speed limit and suddenly speeds up from 30 to 130. So there needs to be a data protection, and there needs to be an inclusivity and an accessibility. One of the big problems that we also see in our current phase is that we see a large divide between the older and the younger generations. While all the school kids within hours adapted ChatGPT, all the teachers and their parents or even their grandparents had no idea what was coming and how to react to it. So we need to really make sure the stakeholders are educated and we understand the risk of these solutions, but also the benefit and how to work with them and not against them.
Yeah, and you touched on a common topic on the show, informing, what role government can play in supporting AI innovation, adoption, and kind of increasing the effectiveness of some of these AI tools applied to government services and, presenting standards for general model use outside of government applications. So I guess, are there any compelling use cases or services that governments can adopt in order to support this vision of responsible and ethical AI tool use?
I like how you phrased made it clear as a user, because we see the government as wearing three hats. They're the user, they're the regulator, and they're also the target, because we see a lot of misinformation and fake models, which bring our democratic system under threat. Coming back to your question, as a user, there's a lot of positive impact. So it could, for example, use Gen AI for citizen engagement with chatbots, with virtual agents, of giving better information from simple questions on how do I file my tax and really talk me through it. I have this special case. How do I use it in this special case? To just explain isn't this policy to me. So it could also use it as, can you draft this policy in a good way, or research-based and saying what else is out there, how can we use it for our government to make a better decision. It can use Gen AI for fraud detection, for example, for transparency and saying, okay, we open up some of our behind the scene and explain things are happening. You could use Gen AI tools to analyze, for example, the citizens' opinions, or increase security, or just draft the law. But with all of that in mind, we have to be careful with current Gen AI solutions. It's best to watch to use them like they're your intern who draft your things, instead of they're the master you have to listen to. Because they still have a lot of issues. They're still not 100% correct all the time. And as I say, every positive impact can also have a negative impact. So if you don't understand them, it could give the wrong advice to our citizen. It could really put them off. It could write wrong policies and or basically just take from a different cultural system and say, okay, we do see what we call the tech colonialism, where we see all the data coming from the US into other regions. So if I now want to write a policy here in the Middle East that is, for example, targeted at women over 65, Gen AI solution that is built in the US will not give me the right advice for these target groups. And again, that's also another risk that we really have to make sure it's inclusive. We don't cut out certain areas and certain demographics. So with all positive sides, as a user, you have to be understanding of what you're doing. Otherwise, it might very quickly turn into a negative impact.
I like the way that you organize government's role, a user, regulator, and a potential target. And I think that, some of the tools here in the States that have, or services that have taken hold as government agencies support kind of an AI ecosystem that's growing rapidly is maybe curating and providing recommendations on vetted, trustworthy data sets, providing standards for, reliability or testing methodologies, and obviously characterizing some use cases. But I think that, you bring up a lot of good points around making sure that the data that is used to inform AI supported decisions is relevant for the task or the population that is affected.
It's one of the things we like to call the weird problem. White, educated, industrial, rich demographics. A long time ago, I called it the pizza problem, because if you ask people to come for your survey and collect data and you offer free pizza, you get college students who like to eat pizza, but you might not get somebody on a diet. You might not get somebody who is gluten-free, or you might not get somebody who just earns so much that they can't be bothered to do anything for free pizza because they can literally just go and buy them themselves. So you really get with whatever incentive you give, you get the people that are approachable with that incentives. And that is always the bias you end up having in your data set. And same with, for example, all the large language models. They learn by their users, and the more from the demographics where the users are coming from, that is the data that's fed into. So an area somewhere here in Africa where you might not have such strong demographics, they might be just smaller in numbers, or have less access to technology and these solutions. They will be massively underrepresented, and that problem will only get worse.
Yeah. Well, and I think in terms of, responsible and ethical AI product development, are there specific steps or recommendations that you've observed in your experience that would help AI developers or experimenters identify some of these biases? Is it analyzing data prior to, it being used by a model, kind of iterating on results? I guess anything that you can share on that front?
That is the most important thing of all. Look at your data before you use it. Really map it out. How is it distributed? What does it say? What does it say about the demographics? Is it a fair sample? Is it an inclusive sample? And then look at the algorithm. Are they transparent? Are they explainable? And there are lots of audit tools where you can audit for bias, for have fairness checks. What happens, for example, if I take certain information away? If I take the gender away on my credit loan application, does it completely give me different results? Then it might show that your gender is one of the main driver, and it might not be the right one you want to have. There are very good ethical guidelines. I think their best advice that I can always give is have a look at the law, or if you don't have a law yet, have a look at the law that is coming or that is in the regions where you have one. And then always stakeholder engagement. Make sure that you talk to the people who are using it, talk to the people that are building that, make sure that there's a right training in place and an understanding of what the solution can do and what it might not be able to do.
last week we spoke briefly with a guest around some of the impacts and expended trends associated with the recently enacted EU AI Act, and I know no equivalent policy or legislation has really taken effect here in the United States. I'm not sure within your Middle East, North Africa region whether or not there are equivalent laws that kind of get to some of the same regulatory concerns that the EU Act or AI Act seeks to address. I guess, are there specific challenges or best practices that you've evolved for policymakers to consider when developing rules or kind of compliance requirements applicable to AI solutions that you'd like to share?
I think most of all important is to start writing these policies, to actually start having legal frameworks. And there are a lot of good ones out there. There are some countries that are absolutely leading, as you mentioned, the EU AI Act, or even China has a very holistic AI law. Singapore has a good model. So there are more and more governments drafting them. The New York Responsible AI Framework is also very good. I think most important for governments is to really say, what are the policies? What are the legal frameworks? Start working on them, start implementing them, then set up the regulatory bodies to actually audit them and enforce them. And that is a huge cost. And one of the things we must not forget, we don't have enough people to build all the AI. Everyone is complaining in the market. Now we want experienced people to audit them and review them and police it. So, which is a big problem that I see. Most of the cases when you ask people, so if you feel like you've been treated unfair by an AI, how do you report it? Most people nowadays still go like, I have no idea, to be honest. But we know that certain decisions are made by AI. So shouldn't we communicate the reporting process right at the forefront of things? And set up ethics committees and advisory boards. That's also very important for government, not just for governments, but also for companies. If you employ AI, make sure you have a framework in your organization to audit it, to understand what you're doing. Bring in the public, have public consultation and engagement, trainings, make them aware of what is happening, how are they dealing with it, what are the frameworks, and so on. And then most important, and it ties it back to the beginning, is the international cooperation. Look at what the other countries are having, what works within your country, what doesn't work in your country, because not all of our ethical frameworks have to be 100% the same. But in the core, I realized we all agree on the same principles. We all agree on the principles of fairness. We all agree on the principle of transparency, accountability, that it needs to be audible, and there needs to be people responsible for what is developed.
That's a great point. And I think some very key recommendations for policymakers to ensure that AI deployment, aligns with democratic principles and adhering to regulations that are under development, now, if not already enacted. I was going to address this a little bit later in our conversation, but I think you brought up an important consideration that, we've seen a lot of workforce development activities targeted here in the United States on, technical workforce education, training initiatives applied to kind of the computing industry, whether it's semiconductor chips or telecommunications, computing networks, getting the wide variety of skills that are required to, secure and edify supply chains here in the United States. And it sounds like there's a similar maybe skills gap internationally that may need to be addressed for, AI tool development and then policy development and enforcement. Are there any sort of workforce development initiatives or activities that you believe would be effective in bridging that skills gap?
So we see a lot of our clients really focusing on reskilling and upskilling their people. It is similar to when we all started moving from paper to computers. It was a massive shift for that generation of suddenly a lot of people didn't even know how to use a typewriter. And suddenly they had to use Excel in their computer and things like that. And computer weren't as easy and to use back then as they are now. There is a big push on really changing your workforce, training them, skilling them, but also not just as a user, but also as a critical thinker. And I think that is a skill that becomes more and more important, is the digital literacy programs, the awareness programs, like what can you do, what shouldn't you do. We saw right at the beginning when all the large language models became democratized, a lot of the companies were screaming and saying, please don't share our IP. It is not okay to take all your code and push it into an open source model and say, can you improve it? And then it comes back, because then the IP is gone. Even these skills that are not just coding skills, but really on like, how do I use AI, are becoming more and more important. And then, of course, the question of like, is it correct? Because we still have, with a lot of the Gen AI, we have the problem of hallucination. And hallucination could be of misinformation. It could be of the model putting things together that doesn't belong together. But it also, these models are still not good in understanding irony and satire. I think it was Bing that answered beautifully on the question, what is the right amount of stones to eat? With the answer, the best amount of stones to eat is a small amount of stones. That was actually not a hallucination in the classical sense, because the information was taken from article from The Onion that has actually written an article that you should only eat a small amount of stones. And the model picks it up and thinks that's actually the truth. So with all of that, we always have to be careful on what comes back. We also saw the story of, right when the models were released, of a lawyer that shared all the confidential information of his law case. But not just that, he took the answer and took it to court and said, oh, this is how I run my case. And then was surprised, who's responsible? I lost. I want to sue the large language model company because the information wasn't correct. No, you have to be aware that it might not be your legal system that the answer is coming from, and you're still responsible for your own work. So all these kind of trainings and understandings we ideally give to society and to the people before we release a technology.
And I think as AI becomes more prevalent in various aspects of government service, business decision-making, which I know has been a focus throughout your career, I think maintaining, impartiality and the focus on providing value to society or promoting broad societal benefits is becoming very critical. I guess, are there specific mechanisms from your perspective that will help ensure that the use of AI, remains impartial and impactful in a positive way, as these tools become more widespread and integrated with government services, business decision-making, things of that nature?
A beautiful dilemma we actually call the Colin-Rich dilemma. And it says, the moment we create a technology, we don't understand the impact it will have. Once we see the impact it will have, it is already so ingrained in our culture and in our society that it's difficult to act on that. And with the speed of development of AI solutions, we actually see that problem getting bigger and bigger. Of course, with every model, you have to really think about what are the unintended consequences that you could have. What is it compliance with what you want to achieve, with your legal framework, with what your business stands for, and even with your sustainable development goals, for example, how to gain public trust in them. And really make sure you're constantly adapting to the changing environment, because we will not have a status quo. These models are getting better every day. and our use cases are changing every day. And also that is something you have to bear in mind when you're training your workforce. It's about continuous learning nowadays. The days where you finish university or you finish college or school and you're done with learning and you can burn all your books and at 5 p.m. it's time for TV. Unfortunately, these days are done, and it's the beauty, but sometimes it's also the pain of my industry that every morning I wake up, there are new news, and the world has jumped.
Yeah, and you brought up a term, a skill, an enabling skill that will help equip, professionals, whether they're a trained computer scientist or a business analyst or someone just entering the workforce, having critical thinking and understanding kind of the data science workflow of, all right, we have models that, illustrate trends, predict outcomes, or edify decisions with better information. And there's a goal or a purpose behind the application or the model being built. So there's a problem to solve, there's a data set, information that's going to shed light on that problem, and then there's a process that processes that information and produces a result. And whether it's an AI tool or a traditional R or Python script that you may work on in university, you're going to be revisiting that outcome and tuning the model to improve the precision of these results. And I think that whether you're a technical or a non-technical professional, having that mentality of understanding, all right, we have AI or automated tools that are reducing the amount of effort or investment of time or expertise that we need in a certain element of our organization's decision-making or operations is going to be an evergreen kind of in-demand skill, I would imagine. So I like your critical thinking label applied to that school of thought, certainly.
I often get asked, so what's going to happen with all the people that will be replaced with AI? We're still waiting for that to happen. We don't really see it. We just see unemployment dropping, higher demand for people, and so on. So we don't see people are saying, okay, we now replaced you by an automated email response. We don't need our assistance anymore or something. No, we see a lot of jobs changing slightly. We see them focusing more on value generation and actually focusing on the really good answers instead of the masses. For example, with call centers, 80% of all the questions are the same. We always say, okay, there are 20% of questions which make 80% of the volume. But with the other 20s, we didn't even have the time for. And you had to hang up frustrated and call 15 times until you finally got the operator who would know how to help you. And so if agent is implemented extremely well at GenAI, we can now say, okay, you know what? We don't need to train our call center more on the standard questions. We actually make sure we provide a better customer service. And then you still need these people because people will be asking for more value in their interactions.
I share in that belief. I mean, thinking through how AI may, replace or supplement my current work. I mean, my attitude is, it frees up individuals to focus on value creation, as you say, kind of higher order strategizing, overseeing model development or refining or validating the results, kind of applying that sanity check that you had talked about. An AI tool leveraging the Onion periodicals as training data, we need a human in the loop to make sure that data is or those outcomes are being flagged and disregarded and things of that nature. But I do think that it frees us up to do more higher order strategic thinking and making decisions and acting on decisions that are informed by the results of AI tools. So I'm with you there. And then I know we had talked a little bit about AI, Gen AI's rise and potentially spreading misinformation. Are there specific principles or activities that show promise in combating AI developed misinformation from your perspective?
Yes, so we do see more and more AI tools not just used for producing fake content and producing misinformation. You can actually also develop AI tools to detect misinformation, to fact check and say, is it actually, did it really happen like that? You can use them for fighting biases and detecting biases. And so we are actually again at this beautiful split of it can be a blessing or a curse. If you use your AI tools right, as a government or even as an organization, you can use them for enhancing the participation, but also ensure information integrity, fight the bias, or ensure privacy. So again, you always have both sides of the coin.
Yeah, the importance, we had talked about a little bit of, government's role of being a user of AI applications, a regulator, and, providing safeguards or protecting itself from potential, threats or making decisions based on misinformation. So there's a lot of opportunity within each of those kind of classes of how the government may use or provide AI capabilities. In terms of how AI technologies may impact democratic processes or governance structures, there's probably a set of recommendations within each of those classes of government's role from, your experience.
And pretty much everything that a government does has to be looked at and say, how can it be done better with using AI? And how can it, for example, be more transparent? How can we make our politicians more accountable for their decisions? How can we provide them better information? Can we check the impact of their policies and saying, going forward, what will it actually mean for society and what does it actually mean for which demographics? That is an impact analytics we weren't really able to do in the past. We are able to pull in far more information across all sectors, and saying, okay, tell me what was a policy in agriculture? Does it work for us? Is there something crazy that actually makes sense for education? This access of information is something we should not underestimate. And within the ethical AI frameworks, it can lead to more ethical decision making. If governments really prioritize the ethical considerations in using their AI, if they use responsible AI, if they invest in the data and in data security, and build the right bodies and enforcement around it, train the stakeholders, and keep the dialogue open, I think then there is a lot of positive effects that we can get out of it.
I think when you were describing your professional background, looking at the return on investment from corporate expenditures, I think that's a huge priority for agencies here in the United States, looking at how do R&D investments or policy changes impact economic conditions? Do they create jobs? Do they create new patent applications? What are the tangible, outcomes or impacts, good or bad, from policy or government operational interventions? And can we analyze those things more quickly, more accurately, so that we can kind of continuously improve the way in which decisions and priorities are set, at the federal level? I think would be a wonderful application of this tool that seems to align with a lot of your experience working in the private sector and with governments as well.
Absolutely. Having said that, ROI can also be a very dangerous measurement, because if I have, for example, in the medical field or even in policy making, in policing or anywhere, I have $1 million to invest. The highest ROI I have in large cities on a wide demographic. If the model works for all male between 20 and 40, I have the smallest investment to do and have the highest return on investment. And all picking up a model that works for all diverse groups is so exponentially more expensive than just saying, okay, I go for the most homogeneous group, that you have to be very careful to say, I drive my decision or I prioritize a project with the highest ROI. In some cases, the ROI is actually in direct conflict with the ethical considerations.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's a point that you brought up earlier, making sure that organizations, whether you're a private company, a government program, you have a set of core values or priorities that guide the parameters and intention of the AI or traditional models that you're using to inform decisions or evaluate impact. And so understanding kind of, I don't know, for lack of a better term, qualitatively what your organization is about, what do you stand for, and then developing tools that support that kind of identity is probably a sequence that's important to keep in mind as organizations adopt some of these tools.
Absolutely, yeah.
I know we had talked a little bit about workforce development and taking a spin on that as we begin to wrap up. Are there any sort of public education and awareness activities that you think would be beneficial for governments or just the technical community at large to consider, knowing that AI models impact organizational decision-making and operations, whether or not you're on the engineering or prompting team, informing the development of these tools? Any sort of educational or outreach activities that you think would be beneficial to consider moving forward?
I know various governments around the world are focusing on basically different groups. They're saying, okay, we have special courses that we take to schools. We actually have a learning and development budget there of starting with the youngsters to understand what pictures to put online and what not, about understanding that not everything about their iPad is as positive as they think it is. But it also goes to outreach for what we used to call the silent generation, the generation over 65, that might not have the access, or that they might not have grandchildren who say, "Oh, grandma, come on, call me on WhatsApp. Don't use the phone," and things like that. So there are clear budgets set aside for I think in pretty much, I know from Singapore, I know from Germany, I know from even here in the UAE, there is a strong focus of government on saying, how do we keep the public up to date? And that could be class training, it could be online training, various types of upskilling and reskilling, or in most cases actually upskilling, because it's more for the private use.
Well said. And I think, looking ahead, do you see any additional kind of long-term impacts that Gen AI may have on government operational systems or kind of the democratic process? Are there any risks or opportunities that either really excite you or keep you up at night as these tools become more and more widespread in public-facing applications?
I do think there is a big risk for our societies at the moment if we are not able to control the risk. We see massive misinformation campaign. We see fake news being a huge problem. We see fake profiles from politicians, fake Instagram accounts and everything. So there is a huge loss in trust in media as well. There's a huge loss in trust in governments, in policing and everything. So we have massive issues there we can't ignore anymore. We really have to think about how do we solve it, and how do we solve the dilemma of saying, oh, you shut me down, but it wasn't considered hate or harassment. That's my right of open speech. And saying, how do we find a proportional response to that, and a legal framework where it allows us to react proportionally and saying, okay, this is okay, but this is clearly not okay, and here we have to react. This we have to shut down. There's a lot of risk that I'm seeing. I see also a lot of risk of unaware or untrained governmental decision makers making decisions on models that they didn't fully understand. Similar to the lawyer who won his law case, or the student who just handed in his homework because it came out of a large language model. We also have to be careful that our politicians don't fall into the same trap. There is a lot of risk. We have to train across all governments, and we have to react on it. Yeah, we are at risk of losing the public trust. We are at risk of not being compliant with the ethical frameworks that the governments themselves wrote. So they should at least be compliant with them. And also for them, it is as similar to every single one of us. It's also expected of every politician to be able to continuously learn, to adapt to the changing environment, to the legal bodies to react to it. To say, oh, we actually suddenly need an ethical AI advisory board in our government, which we previously didn't. We had a technology board or others, but it needs suddenly a different skill. And these risks are very much there. Even losing data, sharing data. We actually back in the days when I worked in the UK, the UK had a very different mind frame to publishing data than Germany. And in 2015, 17, when all of this was just developing, the UK was pretty much like, let's publish data, because when we publish the data, light is the best disinfection against fraud. And while the German mindset is far more, no, we really want to ensure people's privacy. I actually have a lot of German friends who are not on social media at all, because they're like, it's not my business, nobody's business what I do in my spare time. And I really don't want this data to be shared with any company. But in this different approaches, there was also a lot of data leaks or lists of underage teenagers who were seeking psychological help from government bodies and things like that, being leaked and made public on the internet. And this training, this awareness, we often only do after the damage has been done. And we need to find a way to actually say, no, there needs to be a stronger security and privacy protection layer. And luckily nowadays we have the framework. So we are gone a long way from where we were.
Yeah, when I do know that the kind of a risk-based, data-driven approach to kind of applying certain classes of rules to AI models using different types of information is a core component of the EU AI Act. And I guess, are there other elements of, kind of an ideal framework from your perspective that would help increase the responsibility of scaling these models in government applications that we haven't addressed already?
No, I actually think the risk framework is a very, very good framework. It's my preferred framework, because you start thinking in like, what is the potential harm? And then you say, how do we mitigate the potential harm? And then based on that, you say, if nothing goes wrong, or if nothing can go wrong, why does the legal requirements have to be as hard if it's actually a high risk use case? But when you have a high risk use case, then you do have to have all the steps in place. You have to have a very secure environment. You have to have a very well audited algorithm. You have to be very sure that there isn't a bias, or you better only use it for science and for research, but don't release it to the public until you can control the risk.
I guess as we close, any final advice that you'd give to government leaders, policymakers, developers, or users of these AI tools as they're being integrated into strategies, operational functions, or policy drafts?
Most important is have clear objectives. What do you want to achieve with your AI algorithms? And does the AI algorithm actually perform in the way you expected it? Is it accurate? Does it control the risk? Is it transparent? Is it accountable? And does it fall into the responsible AI framework? Is it tested for bias? How often do you monitor and retrain and so on, that it doesn't diverse? And put ethical considerations at the forefront of everything you do. It's not an afterthought. We start with ethical considerations. Make sure you integrate and train all the stakeholders. You have an open dialogue. You have escalation frameworks, but also make sure that it's inclusive. Make sure that it builds the society you want to have and doesn't lead you in any weird directions. And then, invest in the data, invest in the security around it. I think, it's a lot of advice. It's not just one sentence. But if you stick to all of that, you might be on a good track.
Yeah, well, I think defining kind of the objective and developing purpose-built models, I think I would agree with you, is a very important first step. And a lot of the requirements around security or data sources kind of can fan out from there. So I think it's well said. And there's plenty of work and consideration in terms of documenting best practices that people here in the United States can do and across the world as well as these, generative AI models begin to scale.
Problem that we see is building AI can be extremely cheap. You can just go onto Kaggle and copy and paste some code. And then you build a chatbot, or you just integrate ChatGPT or some other large language model. But building trusted and responsible AI that is accurate and that is not biased, that is fair, that is transparent, that's explainable, that is audible, that is not just a black box, that is actually something really expensive and needs a lot of skill and a lot of skilled people to work on it. And I think that is the risk we have to be 100% aware of and say we need a secure layer around it, and security always comes at a price.
Well, Dr. Eva-Marie Muller-Stuler, I appreciate you lending your perspective and expertise related to ethical, responsible AI tool development and potential applications within the government sector. Thank you for your time. And I guess before we wrap up, is there, a place where, listeners can check out more of your work or stay tuned on some of the projects that you're working on moving forward that you would recommend?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm sharing updates on LinkedIn. It's just Dr. Eva on LinkedIn. And I also have a website, www.dreva.ai. So DREVA.ai. And I think I regularly write blogs and watch his space.
Wonderful. Well, I will certainly check that out and encourage the listeners to do so as well. Thanks again for joining us today, and we will talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much, Mark. I really enjoyed our conversation tonight.
AI, Government and the Future is brought to you by Corner Alliance. To find out more about Corner Alliance and how we work with government to create results, visit our website at corneralliance.com. And then make sure to search for AI Government Future in Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. And click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Corner Alliance, thanks for listening.